Okay, we're on live. Can you hear me?
I can. Yes, I can.
Yay. Hi, everyone in Facebook world. So let's see. So there's a 20-second delay. So I say we just start talking. and then folks will catch up. I think I saw, let me go on my feed really quickly and make sure folks are on. Let's see. Okay, we're on. So let's get started. Hi, everyone. Hello in Facebook land. If you don't know who I am, my name is Bumi Emenanjo. I am the founder of Atlas Book Club. Just a little bit about Atlas Book Club. We are a book subscription box company focused on internationally diverse children's books. And our goal is to expose as many kids as possible to different cultures around the world through the books that they read. And today I am so excited and honored and just totally thrilled to have Erin Entrada Kelly, New York Times bestselling author, Newbery Medal recipient many times. And I'm just excited to have you here. Hi, Erin.
Hello.
Hey. So we're just going to have a conversation. And if you have any questions, feel free to comment accordingly, post your questions or your comments in the comments, and we'll get to your questions as we go along. So, Erin, we read Lilani of the Distant Sea, and that in January. So Atlas Book Club, the way it works is every month we feature different countries. So for the month of January, we featured the continent of Asia, but then we also featured China, within the continent, China, India, and the Philippines. And for our Philippines box, we selected Lilani of the Distant Sea. And I just love this book so much, and I just can't wait to get into it. But before we do that, we just want to know a little bit more about you. I know you're Filipino-American, and I know that your mom migrated from the Philippines to the US. Can you tell us a little bit more about your childhood and how you grew up in a Filipino household?
Yeah, sure. So I was born and raised in the States, and my mother, as you said, came over. She was the first in her family, very large family, to immigrate to the US from the Philippines. So my upbringing was a little, I think, unique in the immigrant experience, in the fact that I'm mixed, so my father's white, but also where we grew up in South Louisiana, there was not a large immigrant community. There certainly was not a large Asian community, and there was a very small Filipino community. So I grew up like a lot of kids from mixed cultures, with not quite feeling like I fit into a white culture, but not quite being Filipino, and kind of in this cultural limbo, for lack of a better word. And my mother and I had some growing pains, of course, growing up, because she's coming at her from her vantage point, cultural vantage point, and I'm growing up in America with my vantage point. So for a long time, I really resisted my Filipino heritage, my Philippine ethnicity. And my mother would tell me stories, and of course, because it's your mom, you don't listen, you reject, you don't want to hear it. But as I got older, I started to really listen to the stories that she was telling me, and really pay attention to her experience immigrating by herself to marry a man she barely knew, and all the courage it took for her to do that, and all the struggles and challenges she overcame. And once I started to really listen to her, I started to ask even more questions, and then I couldn't stop, soaking in all the answers. And so a lot of my work, my first book, Blackbird Fly, is a lot about growing up with that kind of push and pull. But with many of my books, not all of them, but most of them, especially Lilani of the Distant Sea, is very infused with Philippine mythology and values and culture and all that good stuff. So since I was a kid, I've been writing since I was about 8 years old. I've always been a bookworm. I've always been a writer.
Wow.
And that part of my heritage that I rejected for so long has ultimately become a very, very big part of who I am as a writer and who I am as an author, and the importance of young people seeing themselves and other cultures in books. So
yes.
for that reason,
yeah. So what kind of books did you read growing up where you saw your culture, if any, you saw your culture reflected, or was it was there a scarcity of that kind of book, or did you have access to that kind of? Tell us a little bit about that.
So I'm sure the books were out there, but they were not readily available to me. So, I mean, not even just Filipino culture, but even the immigrant experience is not something and the immigrant experience in the South certainly was not on bookshelves as it is, more so today. So I grew up reading, white authors, Judy Blume, who I loved and still love and adore. She's kind of my role model. I read a lot of Lewis Sacker, so Sideways Stories from Wayside School. A lot of these books that I still cherish, but didn't really reflect my life or what I saw when I looked in the mirror. But there are some things that I think are universally true, no matter what culture it is. So I saw a lot of myself in Judy Blume's books, even though her books were about, white girls in New Jersey, which but there were still things about her, about the interior life of growing up that we all share, which I think is really important too.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think that's something I've learned, that I always kind of knew that we're all more similar than we're different. I've always known that. But as I've started on this Atlas journey and reading books from all over the world, I've just noticed not only in the way we journey through life and the relationships we have with our loved ones, but also even some of the folklore, some of the folk tales that are passed down from generations to generations. There's always some similarity. And I think that's why Lilani, I connected very much with it, because I grew up in Nigeria. I was born here in the United States. My parents moved back to Nigeria when I was a baby. And I grew up hearing West African folk tales. And so I think that's one of the reasons I really, really connected with this book. Excuse me. So what kind of research did you do when you were writing this book? I'm sure we'll get into the more substantive portion of the book where I recognized some themes that sounded like folklore to me, but were they based on stories that you heard from your mom and that side of your family? Did you have to do additional research for that? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So I did a lot of research. I have a lot of books. I pulled out a few of them. So I have this is a Philippine reader that my mother gave me. This is like a book for, kids in school, but has a lot of folk tales in it. And then a book of Philippine folk tales. And then I have picture books are a great resource for folk tales because, there's a lot of picture books that feature folk tales. So this was another book. And then I also have several, kind of a collection, whenever there's cultures like the Philippines or different cultures that have a very, very strong oral tradition. One thing that I noticed in doing research is a lot of the folk tales, like this book, for example, are written by white, usually anthropologists or sociologists who go in and talk to people and write the stories down. So it was really important for me to also find books written by Native Filipinos. So I have a collection of books by a man named Ernesto Ramos, and he wrote a series of books about just kind of like an encyclopedia of Philippine mythology, basically. But in addition to that, I grew up, my mother is very devoutly Catholic. So I grew up hearing a lot of stories about saints and Bible stories and a lot of Catholic canon type stories. And it's interesting how religious, spiritual stories have in common with a lot of mythology, like the themes, mostly the themes.
Good
so
and
that
evil.
Really, yes, definitely. and sacrifice and suffering and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that really informed the writing as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So how I haven't read any of your other books. Like I said, I have Blackbird Fly
Yes.
in my collection. So that's on my list of books to read. But in looking at just the synopsis of some of the different books that you've read, this is very different. This is very steeped in Filipino folklore that versus the other ones are more modern. How did you make that decision? And why did you make that decision to write a book that was so focused on Filipino history and Filipino mythology versus the others?
Great question. So it is my first and only, for now, fantasy that I've written. And I didn't set out to write a fantasy. I was actually, before I started this book, I was in the middle of writing my book that comes out in May, We Dream of Space, which is another realistic fiction.
Yeah.
But then November 2016 happened, the election, and I felt very disconnected from what I was working on. And I felt I had a lot of feelings, like a lot of people did, right?
Yeah.
And I just really wanted to switch gears and wanted to, I had, all these questions and the answers weren't easily coming to me, you know what I mean? Just like philosophical questions. And one thing that's great about writing fantasy is that it allows you to explore a lot of the questions that you have about the society that you live in without the shackles of the real world. So I sat down and I said, okay, I'm going to write this story, and I'm going to write a story about a girl who is very ordinary. The one thing that makes Leilani extraordinary is she has a great power for empathy and compassion.
Yes.
And so I really wanted something that celebrated a character who wasn't predestined from birth, a character who didn't like stumble upon a rabbit hole or a secret door, just a girl who is driven by love, empathy, kindness, and compassion, and a very selfless heroine. And what drives her is her love for her mother, her love for her community, even when the community does not love her back. She is willing to put herself in danger for something greater than herself. And I felt like that's an important message at any time. But I really wanted to write something that celebrated the power of people, groups of kind people, being able to change the world, being able to change the situation they're in.
Yeah. And I have to tell you, those are some of my favorite types of books based on other cultures, but that show the characters as just regular people. Those are my favorite, and that's actually one of the criteria when we're selecting a book here, because we Chimamanda Adichie, and I've posted this quote so many times on Facebook, where she talks about, in her TED Talk, she talks about the danger of a single story, and where she says stereotypes are not bad because they aren't true, but they are bad. And this is, a very loose paraphrase. They're not bad because they're untrue, but because they make us believe that that's the only story. They don't celebrate the different stories. So when we think about different cultures around the world, I use South Africa, for example, when in our event when we were talking, and when people think about South Africa, they think about apartheid, they think about Nelson Mandela, and think about Nelson Mandela as a hero. Of course, those are very, very important stories, but those are not the only stories. And I think kids just resonate and connect more with just other ordinary kids in stories. So that's one of the reasons I actually love this book. So going on to our next question, well, let's dive right into, since you brought up Leilani, let's dive right into it, right? So what I noticed immediately was that this book is a hero's journey. That's what it is, right? And, but a different type of hero's journey. Of course, she's a girl, so we don't typically see that in books that, have that hero's journey theme. But what I also saw is that she had to through her journey, overcome so many battles. And the way I looked at the battles, I broke them down to emotional battles, psychological battles, physical, like very, very physical battles. You have this 12-year-old girl doing that. And let's go through it one by one. So some of her emotional challenges: her mom is sick, and I don't know how, we'll try not to give away too much for folks who haven't read the book, but her mom is sick. She's trying to help a little boy in her neighborhood. And then she also is battling with some self-esteem, right? And let's talk about that a little bit. Why did you decide to write that emotional challenge of Leilani that way?
Great question. So everything about writing Leilani was obviously very intentional, and she's basically me when I was 12. And whenever I was her age, you don't see books whenever you're kind of like this introspective kid who has low self-esteem and is always second guessing herself and doesn't think she can do anything right. You don't typically see those kinds of characters on journeys being the hero, right? So I really wanted to infuse myself at 12 into Leilani's character when I wrote her. And when I was her age, I did not have a high opinion of myself. I always felt like I messed everything up. I always felt like I didn't know what I was doing. And I had all these perceived shortcomings, which I think everyone can relate to. We can all relate to that on some level, some more than others. But so for her, all that self-doubt, and she often blames herself for things that aren't necessarily her fault, because she's so sensitive, right, to the world around her. And when I was growing up, I was also very, very sensitive, and I didn't feel like being sensitive or being empathetic was in any way a good thing. When I was growing up, I did not feel like it felt like a liability. It didn't feel like a character strength, which is another reason why I wanted to write the book, because there's so much power and empathy that we don't often celebrate in Western society. So the reason why she goes through all those personal emotional struggles is because those are the personal emotional struggles I went through when I was Leilani's age. And I asked myself whenever I sat down to write the book, okay, if I'm, and I was, kind of a little bit of a scaredy cat, I'm not gonna lie. So I'm not one who would then or now charge into like the deep dark forest just to see what's in there. I was not that kid and still not. So I had to ask myself, okay, what would compel me to put myself in danger? And the answer was, if I'm doing it to save someone else, then that's a reason why I would put myself in danger, right? So that kind of informed Leilani's, everything about her spirit and who she is was informed by me looking back at myself when I was Leilani's age.
Yeah. Oh, that makes so much sense. And absolutely, I think all of us, everyone has challenges that they struggle with. And again, which is why I think kids, probably really connect with this character, because everyone has challenges that they're trying to overcome. So, okay, so let's talk about, so we talked about the emotional battles. Well, I guess I wrote down psychological battles, so maybe it is or it isn't. Maybe psychological and emotional are the same thing for this question, but we see her starting off not fully trusting her intuition. So, for example, in the first encounter that she has with the eyeless man, with Elsith, and I could see like her intuition is telling her that get out of there, this is not a safe place for you. But because he's so convincing, he convinces her to stay. But then, of course, she now fully trusts her intuition. And I see that as part of her journey. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I think that also comes back to that feeling of self-doubt that Leilani often has.
Yeah.
But also, I think all of us as human beings, it's in our nature to rationalize things that we want to be true.
Mhm.
And Lalani's in a situation with Elseth where he is making her a lot of promises, you know, the old adage of, you know, I'll make all your dreams come true. And I
Yeah.
mean, who doesn't want to have their wishes granted, you know?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
even though, you know, your intuition is telling you danger, I mean, all of
Yeah.
us, you know, to some degree or another have been in situations where we're like, this probably isn't a good idea, but we just forge ahead anyway because we want
Yeah.
it to be a good idea. With and 9 times out of 10, our intuition is correct.
Yeah.
Right?
And it comes back to nothing is ever free.
Yes.
You know, first he wants just this little thing, and then by the end of their encounter, he wants this huge thing from her. So that, okay, that was really interesting. Okay, so let's talk about the physical battles, right? You have this little girl doing everything. I mean, so I have down here, of course, first she has the battle with Elseth, the second encounter, and then she has this battle with the Bai, which I want to talk about the Bai at some point. And then she has this battle with this underground creatures, you know, that are trying to, I'm really trying not to give away too much, but you have her going through this just very, very physical battles. Tell us more about that.
Sure. So, well, of course, she's on a very perilous journey. So I wanted there to be action scenes from a practical point of view, but also it was important for me that, you know, in the book, she's specifically described as being small. She's a small, scrawny 12-year-old girl.
Yeah.
And so when you don't associate her with physical might or physical strength. So it was important for me to show the different ways you can be strong, you know, as a young person or a person of any age for that matter. Strength doesn't necessarily come with physical might. It can come from intuition. It can come from being clever, intelligent, outsmarting your enemies. And it can come from just pure adrenaline associated with the desire to do what you set out to do. So it was important for me to show her being triumphant emotionally, physically, and spiritually for that matter.
Yeah, yeah. So I have the book here, of course. And just to wrap up, if you don't mind reading a little bit from it. So I have marked page 365.
Ooh, okay.
I know, right? So if you don't mind reading page 365, starting at the nunso shot out of the earth with no warning.
Okay, great.
That's
and
like
where do you want me to end?
And you can end where she says, I'm stronger than you, and even that paragraph.
Oh, okay. Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right. So this is page 365. The nunso shot out of the earth with no warning and grabbed hold of Lalani's ankles. She saw no face, no body, no head, only dry and calloused fingers, nails that scratched her skin, pale flesh dotted with white hair that made her think of Elsa. The nunso tugged and pulled, and when Lalani fell, her chin hit the ground and her teeth hit her tongue and her mouth pooled with blood. She reached out, buried her fingers in the dirt, and pulled, desperate to escape the nunso's grip, but it was strong, and soon there were multiple hands holding her, and how was she to defeat them? She scraped and spit and howled, but she was losing. She reached for the pouch, got the arrowhead, dropped it, spit. She was buried to the knee and bent at an awkward angle as her hand scrambled, searching for the arrowhead. But each time she thought her fingertip brushed its serrated edge, she lost it again. She had no other weapons. Scream. That's all she had left, and that's what she did. She screamed. She screamed, no, and let me go, and stop, and you won't get me, and I'm stronger than you. And even if she didn't know if she was telling the truth or not, she didn't care. She screamed it anyway. She would say it and make it true.
I love it. Like just that part, it's almost like she went through all these battles, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, she finally found her own strength, right? Went through the emotional, psychological, physical battles, and she found her own strength. And even though she didn't like fully believe it, just saying the words kind of powered her through.
Yes, thank you.
Yes,
Yes.
yay, that was awesome. And I think 12-year-old girls everywhere, like on here, you're stronger than you think, you're stronger than you know. So, and sometimes you just have to say the words out loud. Even if you don't believe it deep inside, you have to say it out loud and hear it to kind of drive the point home. So, okay, I have a lot of questions, but let me take some of the questions that have been popping up on our Facebook. Let's see, so we're at 426, but if this is for our Facebook viewers, feel free to stay on. We're gonna stay on as long as Erin wants to. So we'll stay on maybe another 30 minutes, but feel free to stay on. Okay, so from Amy Bird and her child, this is from one of our Facebook viewers. What are the main things that you want people to learn from your books? What lessons do you want people to take away? And this is from a 10-year-old.
Oh, that's a great question. So the main thing that I want readers to take away is the power of the small but mighty, and kind of like what I've been talking about, strength comes in all different forms, and might comes in all different forms, and bravery comes in all different forms. So I want readers to come away with this feeling like kindness is a power, empathy is a strength, and you're always stronger than you think.
Yeah, awesome. So let's see. Another question from Sam Carrera. How did you tap into your 12-year-old self in order to write Leilani's character?
That's another great question. So kind of the short answer to that is I feel like all writers have their own voice, and for whatever reason, my voice really taps into really the ages 8 to 13 really speak to me as a writer. And so that's the age I tend to gravitate toward. And I think it's because I remember very vividly what it was like to be those ages. So it's easy for me to kind of tap into that because it's very, very visceral to me, that age. I remember it very well, being in school, what school smelled like, what the water fountain tasted like, all that stuff is very much ingrained in my brain, for better or worse.
Awesome. So let's see. Well, let's jump into some of the questions I have. And we have a few here, but this is a great segue. You talked about, bravery comes in different forms. And I want to talk about Netsby. How do you say that?
Netsby.
Netsby. Yes, I have that right. Okay. So Netsby is 12 years old as well?
He's 1 year younger, so he's 11.
He's 11 years old. And Netsby is this little boy who lives in the same town, village, has Leilani, and he's going through his own struggle, right? He starts off feeling very bad about himself, feeling like he's a coward, he's bullied a lot. He feels, and these are things that he just feels in himself that he's weak and not as strong as the other boys, but he goes on his own journey. Can you tell us a little bit more about him and why you wrote his story arc in that way and how he comes out at the end of the book?
Sure. So I'm glad you asked about Netsby because he is the character that I get the most feedback about. Which kind of surprised me in a good way.
Yeah.
But when readers talk to me about the book, most of the time they're responding to Netsby and his character.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to, the book touches on a lot of issues of gender stereotypes and gender oppression and what we expect from girls and boys. And so I showed that with Leilani, but gender stereotyping obviously doesn't just affect girls. It also affects boys because they're also expected to be, XYZ strong and mighty, and Netsby's very sweet and sensitive, and his culture, the society that he's in, does not celebrate that. So I wanted to show his journey too, and how he's trying to overcome his own feelings of inadequacy, and how he eventually finds his his strength, and it's
Yeah.
not through physical might.
Yeah. And he finds his strength in his own way, and using his intellect and his smarts, versus what boys are stereotypically being told they should be, like strong and, brawn versus brains, So I love that story. And in his own way, he saves his people, right? Yeah, so I really enjoyed reading that. I just made sure that was one of the characters that I wanted to talk about. So you brought up gender stereotypes. So I have I'm hopping around on my questions, but it's working. So I wanted to talk about how you've written the women in this book and how you've written the men, right? So I noticed with the women in Sangalita, you have them written as their menders, right? So they're the ones that mend, the fishing nets and the clothes, and they also come across as healers, like Verda, for example, and nurturers. But then you have the women of Mount Isa are written in a different way. They're written as very powerful, and the most powerful women on Isa are actually little girls, right? You have the Faye Dawata, you have Uswa, is that how you say her name?
Yes.
The little girl. So tell us a little bit more about how you made those choices. Then, of course, you have the men, how you've written the men and how you've written the boys, right? Tell us a little bit more about how you made those choices.
So it kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier about being able to explore the questions that I had and being able to think about the things that were heavy on my mind, and issues of toxic masculinity and stereotyping and oppression and all these things that have been front of mind for many of us for a long time. So I one thing about writing fantasy that is freeing is that you can kind of push things to the extreme in the society that you're writing about to demonstrate the thoughts you want to get across. So in San Lagita, it's very, very stratified, right? So the men have the jobs that require physical strength. They have all there's a male leader who has actually no real gifts or talents except that he has charisma and he's a strong man. So he's in charge of the whole island. And women are limited to the roles of caretakers and menders and subservient positions. But then I also wanted to present, things that push against that stereotype. So in the book, there's also a boy named Cade, who is very strong, who is very good looking. He's kind of like, if this were in a high school, he would be the jock, right?
Yeah.
He's also very kind. So he doesn't, even though he definitely falls into the idea of what a strong man should be on this island. That doesn't necessarily mean that he believes that that's how all men or boys should be. So there's different characters, hopefully, like pushing against the questions that I wanted to pose. And I also wanted to show, if I'm going to show women being menders and limited to the caretaking roles, then I also, of course, want to show these very, very powerful, not to say there's not power in being a caretaker, that's absolutely very powerful, but the other options, the other ideas of the feminine ideal that are out there, which is kind of what the creatures, it doesn't have to be one thing, it can be many things, right?
Yeah. And I think which makes for a very robust story too. So, okay, let me get into some of these questions. How did you come up with the idea for the character Elseth? And this is from Betsy Misler Warren and her kids. And she, I believe, her kids have a Filipino heritage, so they were very excited. Yeah, they were very excited to read the book. Yeah. So, so she has a few questions, but we'll go one by one. How did you come up with the idea for the character of Elseth?
So this isn't a spoiler because you learn it from chapter 1 for those of you who haven't read the book. There's a legend in San Laguita that there is a monster or a beast who lives in the mountain and has no eyes, and he likes to eat eyes for supper. Ooh. So I can't remember exactly how that idea came to me, except that I think it's really creepy. But Elseth, he's a Mendoran in the book, and he has horns and he has a tail. So he's and Usoa, the character you mentioned, is also a Mendoran, and they are the Mendoran. The creature is inspired by a water buffalo that's indigenous to a particular island.
Okay.
So that's where that comes from. Yeah.
That's so interesting. And to segue into my questions about the mythical characters, there are quite a few mythical characters in this book. And I mentioned earlier that, growing up in Nigeria, I definitely grew up believing in superstition and, folklore and mythology. So I spotted, and I'm going to read a few of what I think were based on folklore, and you tell me if I'm right or wrong. So the story of the spirits in the trees, right? Like when someone passes away, their spirit goes into a tree and lives in the tree, right? That's based on a
yes.
Yeah, it is. And again, you know what, going back to how a lot of it we're more similar than we're different, and how this folk tales kind of go across. Oh, there you go.
I'm just showing the people, for those of you who,
yeah,
the book has these beautiful illustrations inside by Leanne. But these are the trees that she's speaking of, just to show you. But yes,
what page is that on?
255.
255. Okay.
So yes, this is inspired by folklore. Yes.
Yeah. So it's so interesting because right now, for the month of March, we are featuring Mexico and Guatemala, and they celebrate Day of the Dead. And what I found interesting was, and we to some extent celebrate our dead in different ways. So it just spoke to me that different cultures celebrate their dead loved ones in different ways, but we don't shy away from it. They celebrating and celebrate their life. So that was really interesting when I saw that. I'm like, I just did all this research about Day of the Dead. So it was good to make that connection. Okay, so another one that I wrote down was the story of the Bai.
Mm-hmm.
And yes. Well, now that you're going to the book, I noticed that you have, which I thought was a fantastic idea. Is this what you were trying to do in between the substantive chapters? You had the folklores in like 2-page stories in between. Was that what you were trying to do there?
What I was trying to do, so, throughout the book, as you mentioned, there's little brief sections that are from the creature's point of view. The reason is because, so I had 2 reasons. One reason was that I wanted to make the creatures a little more 3-dimensional instead of them just being these evil monsters that are trying to kill Lilani the whole way, which they are. But you kind of get to find out why and why they're angry, why they're trying to kill her. But also, I wanted the reader to always have more information than Lilani. So this is by Vinka. She's actually my favorite, so I'm glad you brought her up.
Yeah.
So my intention was that as the reader's reading, they meet the creature before Lilani does. So they kind of know what's coming, and they always know more than she does, which I think makes for a very interesting experience for the reader.
It does, because it provides context, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it really does. And it really helps, again, goes to the whole robustness of the story. Is that a word, robustness?
We'll make it a word.
We'll make it a word, robustness of the story. So that was, so again, what we do with Atlas is we try to provide some fun facts about the country. And in researching about the Philippines, I learned about the Philippine eagle, right? And so I had learned about that, and then I was reading the book and I was like, is the bio Philippine eagle?
It's inspired by. So what I did was, the Philippines is home to many beautiful native birds. And I really wanted to celebrate that aspect of the islands. So I kind of melded them all into this one great, mighty, 7-foot tall bird. I also did a lot of bird research. Had a friend who has a parrot, and I visited the parrot. I talked to bird experts. So all that mixed up with the beautiful native birds of the Philippines, including the Philippine eagle, which is a fantastic, amazing bird.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Let's go back to the questions. Are the animals from the book real species of animals? Well, you just answered that, I think. Yes, they're inspired by.
And actually, on my website, erinentradakelley.com, there's a section called Teachers and Writers. And if you click on that, you can see the inspiration for a lot of the characters, the source inspiration too.
Okay.
Yeah. And I have like shot pictures of my notebooks and stuff, because I write all my drafts longhand. So I also have pictures of notebooks and stuff on there.
Okay, so we'll make sure we post that link when we post, go back and do like a debrief or wrap up of this video. We'll post the link. Okay, so let's see. Next question. So this is from Timari and Shannon. Did the needle have poison on it, or did Leilani's mom just get an infection? Like how? And in the book you mentioned that happens quite often in the land of Sangalita. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
That's a great question. I love that. No one's ever asked me that before.
Oh, really?
So obviously they have a limited understanding of science and how disease spreads, although Veda's trying in secret to find those answers. So it's caused by an infection from using dirty needles that aren't sanitized. So that's where it comes from. So thank you for asking me that. No one's ever asked me that before.
Great question, Timari. That's from Timari and Shannon. Again, from Timari and Shannon, when Leilani went up to the mountain, was the ground shaking, or was that just a coincidence? She's probably referring, I
think she's referring to, again, we don't want to give too much away.
Yeah.
But it is a, I will say this, there was a lot of rain, as you know, since you read the book, and thank you for reading the book. And it was a coincidence that it happened at the time that it did. I'll answer that, so we don't spoil it too much.
We'll leave it at that. Let's see. Let's go back to Betsy, Nizla Parent and Kids. Who's your favorite character in all of your books? Wow. Whoa.
That's a big question. But I actually have an answer.
Yeah, okay.
So I've written many books, and my favorite character, of course, it's the one book that I think I don't have a copy of up here with me, but my fourth book is called You Go First. And there is a character in the book You Go First named Ben. And Ben is my favorite character. In fact, whenever I finish a book and it goes off to print, I usually never read it again. So I've never sat down and read. I mean, I don't know why I would, but I've read it so many times already. So when it comes out, I won't reread it. But You Go First, I have picked up several times to revisit Ben, just because I miss that character. And it sounds strange because I'm the one who wrote the character, but he doesn't feel like a character that I made up to me. He feels like a person, which is how you hope it is. So Ben Boxer from You Go First is my favorite character that I've ever written.
Well, I guess everyone has to pick up You Go First by Erin Entrada Kelley ASAP. I am definitely adding that to my list. So that sounds like a character that I definitely want to know more about. So, all right, let's see. Another question, was Leilani of the Distant Sea always the title of the book, or did you have a different title in mind?
No, it was, all my titles changed, so I'm not good with titles. So the original title, it's not going to make any sense because the story has changed so much, but this is the original notebook that I started the draft in.
Mm.
And you can see it says The Girl with Golden Feet. That was the original title.
Yeah.
And you're probably wondering why, because there's no really feet in the book. But in
Right.
the original draft, there was going to be Faye DeWatt was going to have golden feet. It was a whole thing with the feet. So, but that changed in revision.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
my editor and I went through many, 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 many titles before we finally landed on Lilani of the Distant Sea.
I love it because it also feels like a hero's journey title. You know what I mean? Lilani of the Distant Sea just sounds so powerful. Okay, let's go on to, oh, this is a good one. Also from Betsy. Do you prefer writing fantasy stories or realistic fiction better?
Ooh, that is a great question. It's hard to say which one I prefer because they're so different. The experience of writing them is very different because with fantasy, there's so much world building, which is very challenging, at least for me. I think I would, if I'm being honest, I think I would say that writing realistic fiction comes more organically to me, I'll say. I don't know if I necessarily prefer it. It's whatever the story dictates. But writing realistic fiction is a little bit more organic for me. So, you know, I'll probably write more realistic fiction over the course of my career than I will fantasy. It's not to say I won't write it again, though.
Awesome. All right, let's see. Let's go to, what are you working on now?
That's a great question. So right now I'm working on a chapter book series. So this will be for younger, you know, first, second grade, third grade, somewhere around there. And it's about a girl named Marisol, and I'm also illustrating it.
Nice.
So chapter books have, as many of you know, have illustrations, usually spot illustrations and things like that. So I'm the author illustrator, which is very scary and exciting.
That is awesome. So that question was from Madeline Schnur. That she's the one who wanted to know what you're working on now.
That's my friend Madeline.
So let's see. Another one from Chris Time. What gave you the idea or inspiration for your other books?
Oh, each of them have a different inspiration, but most of them come from some kind of usually a character. So I usually start with the character. I have a character in my head, and you know, I'm curious about who they are and what kind of situation they're in. So they usually start from there. Each book has different inspiration though. Like my first book, Blackbird Fly, is very much my story, you know. So each one is a little different. And then We Dream of Space, the one that comes out in May, it takes place in January 1986, in the weeks leading up to the Challenger disaster. So that was the inspiration for this. So it just depends.
Okay. So someone asked earlier on about which is your favorite character of all your books. Now we have a question again from Chris Time. Which of all your books is your favorite?
That's a toughie as well. Yeah. But I do have an answer. You know, most authors say they can't pick, but I like to have favorites because that's just how my mind works. But so of course, Hello Universe won the Newbery Medal, so I love it. But and Lilani, I also love Lilani because it's a fantasy and it's my first one. It's this big epic story. But my favorite is The Land of Forgotten Girls. That's my second book. Nice. And it is, of all my books, it is the least read, I would say, but it's still my favorite because it's about sisters. It's about using your imagination and love and to carry you out of dire circumstances. So it's kind of it's a bit of a sad book, but I love sad books. So it's my favorite because I love these sisters, and they tell each other. The older sister tells the little sister stories to kind of help them power through. And for the grown-ups out there who've read Angela's Ashes, it's very much inspired by Angela's Ashes, which I read not long before I wrote this.
Awesome. All right, let's see. Try and get through these questions. Okay. So here's one from Chidinma, who's on the Atlas team. Leilani of the Distant Sea features a young girl who, oh, I love this question. Okay, features a young girl who embarks on a journey to help her sick mother. Can you talk about depictions of bravery in children's literature and why you think it's important?
Oh, that is a good question. So I think what's really exciting, especially right now with children's literature, is that bravery is depicted in many, many different ways than it has been historically. So
Yeah.
I feel like historically, when we think about bravery, we kind of think of this like capital B bravery of like charging out and like, you know, like I said earlier, into the deep dark forest and being very loud and mighty and wielding a sword and stomping your feet. And I think what we're seeing is more stories, and I hope we see even more of the characters who you don't typically think of as brave or heroic or courageous, like Leilani. Kids who are quiet and unassuming, don't make a lot of noise.
Yeah.
You know, being brave, and it all goes back to that concept that I believe in, and I think we all should embrace of bravery having many different faces.
Yeah.
So I think we're seeing more stories of ordinary kids with extraordinary hearts.
I love it. Yeah.
Yes.
And I totally agree. We're seeing it more, and we're seeing it with different cultural backgrounds.
Yes.
And what I've noticed too, and this is such a great time for children's literature. What I've noticed too is we're seeing it in showcasing the diversity in different cultures too. You know, so you could have 3 Filipino books or 3, you know, Asian American books, you know, totally different and showcasing bravery and other admirable characters in different ways. And that's what's so awesome about this time. So hopefully this trend continues, and we, you know, authors like you and others, you know, around the world continue to produce stories like this. So let's see. So we'll take one more question about the book, and then we'll do some rapid fire questions.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So here's one from Timmery and Shannon. Why was the bird, I'm assuming, so mad at them?
Oh, so Vinca, that's a great question. Vinca is mad because honestly, it's not necessarily that she's mad at them specifically. She's just very angry because, you know, for those of you who read the book, you know that she lost her flock, and then she lost her sister who she loved more than anything in the world, and now she's all alone. So, you know, it's kind of that thing where she's not necessarily angry specifically at Leilani or Usoa or even Usoa's mother. She's just angry and sad and lonely. And sometimes when people are angry and sad and lonely, it poisons, you know, who they are, and then they become angry at the world, you know, because of their own sorrow. So really, that's what her deal is. She's just angry, period, at the world.
Okay. And okay, I'll take one more so we're not running too much out of time. Let's see. What, this is from Madeline Schnur. What are some middle grade books you've recently read that you've enjoyed?
Oh my gosh, where to begin? I read a lot. I read probably like 2 books a week, Madeline. So I would say, well, one book that I've been talking about endlessly is Coup by Kayla Noel, which just came out in March. It's about a little girl who's being raised by pigeons. It's very, very good. I also love The Moon Within. And I loved Other Words for Home, which just won a Newbery honor. Fantastic book. There's so many. The List of Things that Will Not Change by Rebecca Steed is another favorite. I mean, there are so many. There's so many good books out there.
There really are. And that's, you know, prior to starting the Atlas Book Club, I read a lot of like African lit is my favorite for a very long time. And, you know, but I read a lot of more adult fiction, and I started reading some children's literature is so rich and is just so right now, especially that middle grade and the young adults. Yeah, we have, the younger adults, which are like 14, 16 and above. But that sweet spot between 12 and 16, the younger adult books is so awesome. So yeah, children's lit is lit.
So true, though. It's very complex, and I think people who aren't familiar with it don't realize how complex and rich and deep it goes. But those of us who are entrenched in it, we know.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, that's all I've been reading lately because, of the work that we do here, and I'm enjoying it. I really am. So, all right, we have about 4 minutes. We're gonna do some rapid fire questions. Let's go. What's your favorite Filipino snack? I'm all about the snacks.
Lumpia. Yes.
Lumpia. Yes. Yay. Okay. What's your favorite city that you've traveled to?
Oh God, that's so hard. You know what? I'm gonna say, what's my favorite city?
That's hard.
It's very hard. The first thing that comes to mind is Manila. I went to Manila for the first time. I'd never been to the big city of Manila, and it was absolutely wonderful. So that's what I'm gonna go with.
Nice. And how often have you been to Manila, been to the Philippines?
Not as often as I would like. And I had never been to Manila before because my family's from Southern Leyte. So yeah. Also, Honolulu was very lovely.
Yeah, of course. Let's see. What's your favorite Filipino folktale?
Oh boy, that's a hard one. That is a really hard one. I'm going to say, in Lalani of the Distant Sea, I have a Dewata, it's like a tree fairy, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to say, and it comes in many, many different forms. There's many versions of it, but I'll say, that's what I'll say. Yeah.
Okay. And let's see. Can you tell us one thing about Filipino culture that is not popular knowledge?
Ooh, you know what I think is not popular knowledge is the number of languages and dialects in the Philippines. So most people assume, our minds automatically put things in a monolith, I think, and people automatically assume that Tagalog is the language that everyone speaks. But there's 7,000 islands in the Philippines, and there's many, many different dialects. So I don't know that people even know that there's 7,000 islands, for one thing. And I don't know if they know the number of languages and how varied and rich that aspect of it is. I wish I could speak any of them.
Right.
But I wish I could. So yeah.
And that's a plug. I'm going to put a plug in there for Atlas Book Club. In our box, we have fun facts about the different countries. And in fact, the bookmark that we give as part of the box, what kind of businesswoman am I? I don't have one in front of me. The bookmark.
Well, you did this, so.
I know, the bookmark has number of, I think we put on there the number of islands, 7,000 islands in the Philippines. We put some information on there about the different dialects, the different languages spoken in the Philippines. So if you want to learn more about the Philippines and get this book, go to www.atlasbookclub.com. Yay! And get the January Nest box. And you'll see a picture of the box with the book and all the goodies in there. So last question. Oh, no, second to the last question. What's your favorite Filipino tradition?
Oh, you know what my favorite tradition is that's kind of dying out is mano. So mano is when you meet someone who's your elder and you put your hand to their forehead as such. So instead of shaking their hand, you would put it to your hand to their forehead.
I love it.
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. And then last thing, can you mention one thing that you've recently learned that most cultures share. So for example, I talked about, folklore is something that I've learned that cultures around the world share. Or if you can think of one thing that you've learned that most cultures share, that crosses cultures.
I think obviously there's things, family and love of community and things that cross cultures. But one thing, speaking of folklore, that I find very interesting is this concept of mermaids. So mermaids are very cross-cultural. So
they are, yeah.
I'm sure there's landlocked cultures where maybe they don't have mermaids, but mermaids appear in so many different cultures' folklore, which I find fascinating. And so I used mermaids, in Lalani, there's a Datasa Ulad who has the head of a woman and the body of an eel, but she was actually inspired by mermaids in Philippine mythology who have the tail of an eel, and sometimes they'll have the tail of a shark, or but there's mermaids across all cultures, and I love that. I love that there's things like giants, for example. You see giants in so many different cultures, and
I'm glad you said that, because mermaids are a huge part of Nigerian culture, like Yoruba culture. So I'm Yoruba. In Nigeria, we have three main tribes. We have Yoruba, Igbo, and Hausa. And I'm from the Yoruba tribe, and we call them Mami Water. That's what they're called, Mami Water. And, mermaids are a huge part of our culture as well. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because I didn't even make that connection. So, yay. Well, this has been such a joy. It really has. This has been such an awesome experience. Let's talk about your coming book, the book that you have coming out. When is it coming out?
So it's coming out May 5th, and it's set in, here it is, We Dream of Space, and it's set in the month of January 1986.
Okay.
And I have to tell the grown-ups, I'm going to make the grown-ups sad, it's considered historical fiction. Even though it's 1986.
Yeah.
I said, wait, that can't be historical.
I know.
But it is.
Yeah.
But it's inspired by the Challenger disaster. So that's We Dream of Space.
Yeah.
May 5th.
Okay. And then of course you can get that at booksellers everywhere.
Everywhere books are sold.
Everywhere books are sold, and support your local bookstores. I know a lot of bookstores are doing free shipping and have all kinds of incentives right now. So especially in this hard time, if you can and you're looking to buy books, please support your local bookstore. I do have, I guess I'm not a terrible businesswoman after all.
There you go. And also you can visit your local library.
Or your local library, if you can. And of course, this is our box for, we're in March, right? March. And as you can see, we're featuring North America. So we're featuring Mexico and Guatemala, and folks should be getting their boxes now. And we have some amazing books in there. If you want to get, again, the box that features Lilani of the Distant Sea, go to www.atlasbookclub.com, and we'll put all the links and everything, on our page. So all that information is there. Again, thank you. Thank you. So much fun, such a joy. Thank you for taking the time. And to everyone out there in Facebook land, I hope this was fun. You learned a little bit about Erin, a little bit about a lot about Filipino culture. That was my favorite part. And I also learned more about the book Lilani of the Distant Sea. And if you haven't read it, you feel inspired to pick up a copy. All right. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Bye.
Now I got to figure out how to turn this off.
We'll just smile at the camera as you figure it out.
I'm going to, let's see, stop live stream. There you go. Bye, everyone.
Bye.